Wake up, old man. This isn't a shelter, the young man barked, then dumped a full cup of scalding coffee onto the veteran's head. Laughter rippled through the cafe. The old man jerked upright, blinking against the heat, but he didn't shout, didn't strike back, just sat there, soaked and silent, slowly patting his face dry with a napkin. His hands trembled, not from weakness, but from decades of learning to hold the line. He had endured worse, and yet, within minutes, the door opened. A man in a suit entered, face pale, steps unsure. He fell to his knees. "Sergeant Raymond Cole?" he asked, voice cracking. The cafe fell silent. Every eye turned. The boy who had mocked the veteran, that was his son. Raymond Cole sat in the far booth by the window, his weathered flannel shirt wrinkled from another long night-loading freight at the docks. The early morning light poured gently through the cafe's large glass panes, casting soft streaks of gold across the scuffed wooden floors and muted gray tiles. A half-finished cup of black coffee rested near his calloused hand, and his head leaned slightly against the wall, eyes shut, just for a moment of stillness. At 68, Raymond moved with the deliberate rhythm of a man who had outlived war, loss, and time itself. His hands bore the quiet signature of a life lived under duress, fingernails permanently darkened from grease and work, knuckles scarred from both machine and battlefield. The faint glint of a Purple Heart pin, nearly invisible to the bustling patrons, clung stubbornly to the collar of his shirt. Irene Boyle's cafe had become his quiet refuge. Nestled on the corner of Madison and Sycamore, the cafe buzzed with students, professionals, and couples capturing curated moments for their social feeds. Raymond came not for the crowd, but for the quiet mercy of routine. A black coffee, 30 minutes of silence, and a booth where no one asked questions. But today was different. Ethan Caldwell strolled in with his usual entourage. 3 fraternity brothers, all equally loud and overdressed for breakfast. Ethan, at 21, wore his father's wealth like a badge of entitlement. His haircut was sharp, his loafers polished, his jacket expensive in that deliberately casual way only money could afford. He saw Raymond almost immediately. "Look who's here again," he muttered to his friends, gesturing toward the slumped figure at the window booth. "Man, this place is starting to smell like a shelter." They chuckled, low and immature. One of them pulled out a phone and began filming casually, waiting to see what Ethan would do next. Another sipped his vanilla latte, amused. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his friend's steaming mug of coffee, freshly poured, still too hot to drink, and crossed the room in long strides. He didn't yell. He didn't ask. He just acted. "Wake up, old man. This isn't your living room," he sneered. And with that, he tilted the mug forward and dumped its contents straight onto Raymond's bowed head. The cafe fell into a stunned half-silence. Raymond jerked upright, gasping softly as the hot liquid splashed across his scalp and soaked through his shirt. The pain was sharp, but the humiliation cut deeper. He blinked hard, trying to process the sudden assault, but said nothing. His left hand trembled slightly as he reached for a napkin and began dabbing at his forehead, slow and methodical. Ethan burst out laughing. "Guess he needed a warm wake-up," he announced proudly to the room, as if expecting applause. His friends snickered behind him. The camera kept rolling. Most patrons glanced away. Some looked uncomfortable. Others chuckled nervously. No one moved. No one stood up. Behind the counter, the young barista froze mid-pour. She had seen Ethan before. His father was a donor to the university. She bit her lip and said nothing. From a small table near the back, Angela Cruz saw everything. She wasn't wearing her VA badge today, just jeans and a cardigan, but she recognized that bearing, that posture, that stillness. She had worked with veterans for almost 20 years, and she could always spot one, even when they sat quietly in a booth, being disrespected by children who didn't know what silence had cost. Angela stood up slowly, not drawing attention to herself. She didn't speak to Ethan, didn't confront him. She knew better than to throw fuel on fire. Instead, she stepped outside with her phone already dialing. Her contact list was short, but effective. She called someone she trusted, someone who still believed that honor didn't age and that some debts are never paid in full. Back inside, Raymond sat dripping. He said nothing. He didn't even look at Ethan. He just pressed the napkin to his face and quietly absorbed what life had taught him to expect. Pain, followed by indifference. But outside, in the rising morning sun, a quiet storm had begun to form, one that Ethan Caldwell wasn't ready for. Not even close. Raymond Cole didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw the cup back, didn't curse, didn't even meet the eyes of the boy who had drenched him in humiliation. He simply pressed another thin napkin against his brow, careful not to drip onto the table. The paper tore slightly as it met his skin, cheap and damp, much like the respect he now knew this world reserved for old men. Around him, conversations resumed awkwardly, like a record skipping back into rhythm. A few patrons offered guilty glances, but not one of them stepped forward. The laughter had faded, replaced by a dull, guilty murmur. And still Raymond said nothing. Not because he lacked words, but because he knew words didn't matter to people who didn't want to understand. He had learned that lesson halfway across the world, under fire, under sand, under orders. His hands moved automatically as he wiped the coffee from his neck, the heat already cooling against the morning air. His fingers grazed the scar on his shoulder, just beneath the collar. Funny, that one had come from something not so different, only instead of scalding liquid, it had been a shard of hot metal. Fallujah, 2007. He had been in the middle of a recon sweep, the kind of mission that didn't make headlines but often decided whether children lived to see another day. His unit had found themselves pinned down in a marketplace, gunfire cracking like static off walls made of dust and fear. It wasn't the enemy they feared most. It was the civilians, the unpredictable chaos, the little ones who ran before the shooting stopped. She couldn't have been more than 7. A little girl in a blue scarf had darted from an alley, chasing a ball she'd dropped during the chaos. Raymond had seen her too late to stop her, but not too late to shield her. He'd tackled her to the ground, curling his body over hers as the grenade exploded 15 feet away. The pain was instant, hot, sharp. But the sound of her sobbing under his chest, that was the part that stayed. She'd looked up at him, not crying anymore, just watching. Her tiny hand had reached up and touched his cheek. "Shukran," she'd whispered. "Thank you," before he passed out from the blood loss. Raymond blinked back to the present, napkin still in hand. The café was bright again. The laughter was gone, but the shame remained. He thought of that little girl. And then he thought of Ethan Caldwell standing just feet away, proud of what he'd done. What could a boy like that know of restraint, of sacrifice, of standing between someone and destruction, not for reward, but because it was right? Raymond's father had served in Vietnam, returned home to be spat on in airports. Raymond had promised himself that he'd never demand respect just for wearing a uniform. He didn't need medals on a wall. He just wanted to live quietly, to support his daughter Leah, to leave the world a little better than he'd found it. But this morning, this was different. This wasn't war. It wasn't chaos. It was deliberate cruelty, delivered in public, to the sound of laughter. And yet, he still didn't react. Because that was the code. That was the discipline. Not the kind taught in basic training, but the kind you earn over decades, where your pride becomes a private thing, guarded not by ego, but by silence. He wasn't going to make a scene. He wasn't going to explain himself. If the world wanted to treat him like a broken leftover of someone else's history, then let them. But not one person in that cafe could take from him what he had seen, what he had endured, what he had saved. Raymond folded the ruined napkin into his hand and leaned back against the booth. He didn't feel heroic, but somewhere deep in his spine, beneath old injuries and older burdens, the core of a soldier remained, quiet, still, unshaken. And soon, the world would remember it. Angela Cruz stepped out of the cafe into the morning light, her jaw clenched tighter than she realized. Her phone was already in her hand. She didn't need to scroll far. There were only a few people she trusted in moments like this. She found the name and pressed call. "VA Regional, this is Sergeant Grayson." "Grayson, it's Cruz. We've got a situation. Civilian harassment of a decorated vet. Public setting. Non-responsive staff. Possible burn injuries." There was silence for a beat on the other end. "Name?" "Raymond Cole." Another pause, this time heavier. "I'll make the calls." Angela exhaled slowly and ended the call. She turned back toward the cafe, watching through the glass as Raymond sat hunched, still dabbing his collar with another napkin. She knew the look in his eyes. That was the look of someone who had learned to absorb pain in silence, because silence was safer than speaking. Inside, things were starting to shift. Irene Boyle had just emerged from the back hallway, clipboard in hand, brushing a strand of silver hair out of her face as she approached the counter. She immediately noticed something was wrong, the low buzz of unease, the stiff posture of the barista, and the hush that clung to the cafe like humidity. She spotted Raymond, then the coffee, then the smug grin on Ethan Caldwell's face. "Can someone tell me what the hell just happened?" Irene asked, loud enough to snap a few heads around. The barista hesitated. A guy spilled coffee, on purpose. On Mr. Cole." Irene's gaze narrowed. "You spilled coffee on him?" "No," the girl stammered. "Not me. Him." She pointed. Ethan rolled his eyes, tossing his phone on the table with a thud. "It was just a joke. Relax." "A joke?" Irene repeated, her voice rising. "You think scalding a man in my cafe is funny? You think humiliating a veteran, because I know Raymond Cole, is something to laugh at?" Ethan opened his mouth, but one look at Irene's face made him hesitate. Her reputation wasn't built on fake niceties. She'd run the cafe for nearly 40 years and had served more soldiers, cops, and single moms than he could imagine. Her brother had died in Afghanistan. Her husband had served in Korea. And Raymond? He'd been coming here for nearly a decade. "Get out," she said, her voice trembling, not from fear, but fury. "Take your coffee, your ego, and your spoiled attitude, and get out of my cafe." "You can't just kick me out." "I can, and I just did." The room shifted. Tables quieted. Conversations died. People who had stayed silent during the attack now looked up, sensing that the current was turning. A man near the back stood slightly. A woman next to him murmured something about respect. It wasn't much, but it was more than silence. And then the bell above the door jingled. A figure stepped in, broad-shouldered, uniformed, and calm. Deputy Kyle Boyle, Irene's nephew, surveyed the room like he'd just stepped into a brewing bar fight. He nodded to his aunt with quiet acknowledgement, then turned toward the center. "I got a call about a possible assault," he said flatly. Ethan blanched. "That's ridiculous. It was just coffee." "You poured hot liquid on someone's head, son. That's not just coffee, it's battery." Kyle's voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. His hand hovered near his duty belt, not threatening but clear. He looked over to Raymond, still seated, now calmly folding napkins. "Mr. Cole, would you like to file a report?" Raymond didn't answer right away. He looked at Ethan, who for the first time looked unsure of himself. "I'm fine," Raymond said softly. "I'm used to being burned." It wasn't a statement of forgiveness. It was a truth, and it made the room colder than the air conditioning ever could. Kyle turned to Irene. "I'll stay a while, just in case." Irene nodded. "Good." And just as tension began to peak, the door opened again. This time there was no uniform. Just a man in a dark gray suit, mid-50s, with silver at his temples and a haunted look in his eyes. He stood at the entrance, scanning the room like he was looking for a ghost. And when his eyes landed on Raymond Cole, he went pale. Angela, back inside now, saw it too. The ripple had begun, and it was only just starting to break the surface. The door opened again with a faint chime. This time it wasn't a college kid or a cafe regular. It was a man whose presence shifted the entire mood of the room the moment he stepped inside. He wore a crisp navy blue suit, his tie knotted with military precision. His posture was upright, chin forward, hands relaxed but deliberate. Even before he spoke, anyone with a shred of sense could tell. This man had worn command like a second skin. Colonel Marcus Hale, retired Marine Corps. He scanned the cafe like he was clearing a room in a war zone. His eyes locked onto Raymond Cole in the corner booth, and softened, only slightly. Angela Cruz stood and stepped toward him. "Colonel," she said quietly but firmly. "I got the call," he replied, eyes not leaving Raymond. "Didn't believe it. Until now." Behind him, another familiar figure followed through the door. Deputy Kyle Boyle's backup, Officer Grayson. Together, they closed the distance between the counter and the booth, where Ethan Caldwell was still trying to recover from being called out by Irene. Colonel Hale reached the booth and offered a hand. "Sergeant Raymond Cole," he said, his voice steady. "Recon, 1st Battalion, Ramadi, 2007. You probably don't remember me." Raymond looked up. "Hale," he said after a pause, the corner of his mouth curling just slightly. "Used to call you Compass. Always knew which way to walk through hell." That got a faint chuckle from the colonel. "You remember." Before more could be said, the front door opened once more, and this time no one spoke. Because the man who stepped through that door didn't just shift the energy, he stopped it. He wore a charcoal gray business suit, but his steps were unsure. His face was pale, drawn, and almost gray around the temples. He looked like someone who had just seen a ghost, or become one. Thomas Caldwell, owner of Caldwell Industrial Logistics. Prominent donor, wealthy, powerful, and very, very shaken. His eyes swept the room like a man waking from a long nightmare. Then they landed on the booth, on Raymond, and Thomas Caldwell fell to his knees. "Sergeant Cole?" he asked, voice cracking. The cafe went absolutely still. Not even a spoon stirred. Raymond, still seated, blinked at the man now kneeling in front of him. "Do I know you?" "You pulled me from a burning truck," Thomas whispered. "Ramadi, I was a civilian contractor. Your convoy got hit. You came back for me. Twice. I was screaming. I thought I was going to die. You carried me out." It began to click slowly. Raymond's brow furrowed. "Your name was Caldwell?" "I never forgot you," Thomas said, tears already welling in his eyes. "I tried to find you, but they told me you declined recognition. No medals. No press." Raymond nodded once. "Wasn't my style." By now, Ethan had stood up, his face draining of color. He stared at his father wide-eyed, mouth slightly ajar. "Dad?" he asked, voice small. Thomas turned as if seeing his son for the first time. "You did this?" Ethan stammered. "It was just a joke. I didn't know who he was." Thomas didn't raise his voice, but somehow the quiet words cut sharper than any yell. "You poured boiling coffee on the man who saved my life," he said. "The only reason you exist, the only reason I exist, is because that man carried me out of hellfire on his back." Ethan stumbled back a step. For the first time, his smugness cracked. He looked around the room, at the stunned barista, at Angela, at Deputy Boyle, at Colonel Hale, and then he looked at his father, still kneeling in front of Raymond Cole. "You didn't just hurt a stranger," Thomas said, his voice firm now. "You dishonored a Marine. You dishonored this entire country. And worst of all, you dishonored me." Ethan had no words, because there were no words. Thomas rose slowly, wiped his face, and turned back to Raymond. "I owe you everything," he said. "And I'm sorry for this, and for letting my son grow up thinking decency was optional." Raymond stared at the man, the weight of the moment slowly pressing into him like a familiar load. He gave a tired nod. "You made it home," Raymond said quietly. "That's all that mattered back then." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Ethan Caldwell, who had entered the cafe as a joke-spouting frat boy, now stood frozen in front of the man he had mocked. And the truth that would follow him for the rest of his life. The tide had turned, and no one in that cafe would ever forget the name Raymond Cole again. For several long seconds after Thomas Caldwell's words faded, no one moved. Then quietly, almost shyly, a woman near the window stood up and approached Raymond Cole. Her hands trembled slightly as she extended them. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't do anything. I didn't. I should have." Raymond didn't say a word. He just nodded, his eyes steady. She gently squeezed his hand, then stepped back with tears in her eyes. One by one, they followed. A young man in a postal worker's uniform approached and simply said, "Thank you." An elderly couple from the far corner asked if they could hug him. A college girl with a laptop still open apologized between sobs. And then a group of veterans, 3 of them, who had quietly occupied the corner by the bookshelf, stood, walked to Raymond's booth, and offered a sharp, silent salute. Raymond returned it, slowly. His fingers were stiff, his shoulders aching. But the motion was clean, earned, recognized. In the midst of it all, Irene Boyle stepped behind the counter, wiped her eyes and reached for a piece of masking tape. She scribbled a quick note on it in black marker and slapped it against the wooden beam above Raymond's booth. The note read, "Reserved for those who've served." Then she turned to the crowd and raised her voice. Not with anger now, but something stronger, something clearer. "As of today," she said, "coffee is free here for any veteran, always." A burst of applause followed, real, sincere. Irene didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her word was gospel in this part of town. At that moment, the front door swung open again, this time with purpose. Colonel Marcus Hale had returned, this time holding a folder under one arm and speaking into a phone. "Yes," he said firmly. "Raymond Cole. VA file was never updated after discharge. No dependents listed, no disability compensation, no benefits claimed." A pause. "Well, we're fixing that today." He ended the call and crossed to Raymond's table. "I've already spoken to a contact at the regional office," Hale said. "They're reactivating your file. We'll be getting you full disability benefits, housing adjustment, retroactive pay. You'll also be evaluated for full medical access." Raymond blinked, surprised. "That's a lot." "It's overdue," Hale replied. "Way overdue." At the far end of the room, Ethan Caldwell stood with his arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. His father was finishing a conversation by the counter, quiet but intense. After a few moments, Thomas approached his son and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're done," he said plainly. "Fired. Effective immediately." "What?" Ethan choked. "Dad, come on. You'll spend the next 6 months volunteering at the VA hospital. That's not negotiable. I've already called them." Ethan's shoulders sagged. "And school?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "I contacted the university. You're suspended until further notice. If you want to earn back your place in this family, or in this world, you'll do it by serving the people you tried to humiliate." No yelling, just consequences, the kind that stick. Angela Cruz stood near the register, watching everything unfold with folded arms and quiet satisfaction. She caught Raymond's eye and gave a small nod, as if to say, "You're not invisible anymore." Word spread faster than wildfire in a town like this. By midday, the cafe was trending locally on social media. A few photos, Raymond with coffee-stained shoulders, Thomas Caldwell kneeling, veterans saluting, circulated with captions like, "This is what respect looks like." By evening, reporters were calling. City council members issued statements. Other businesses followed Irene's lead, offering free meals, reserved seating, even job interviews for veterans. The local college announced an emergency town hall on civil responsibility and honoring service. That weekend, a line formed outside Boyle's Cafe, not for lattes, but to shake the hand of the man who had stayed silent while the world watched, and still chose dignity. Raymond Cole didn't ask for any of it, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel forgotten. He felt seen, and more importantly, he felt respected. 3 days later, Raymond Cole stepped into the glass atrium of Caldwell Industries, not as a forgotten face from the margins of society, but as a newly appointed operations supervisor in the company's logistics division. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years, he'd worked graveyard shifts in warehouses, unnoticed, unthanked, always temporary. Now he stood in a tailored company jacket, being led through the building by the same man whose life he'd once carried out of a firestorm. Thomas Caldwell had insisted, not out of pity, not even out of gratitude, but out of conviction. "I don't need a figurehead," he told Raymond. "I need a leader who understands people, and there's no one I trust more than you." Raymond hadn't accepted easily. Pride, even quiet pride, runs deep. But after much persuasion and a long conversation with himself, he'd said yes. Now he walked through the floor of the central distribution hub like it was a forward operating base. Forklifts whirred past like armored transports. Pallets were stacked like supply drops. And the workers, most of them younger, looked up when he passed, instinctively straightening their backs. It wasn't fear. It was respect. Word had spread quickly inside the company. The new guy wasn't just some old vet. They'd seen the news. They'd heard the story. But what impressed them more was how Raymond listened. He didn't bark orders. He asked questions. He remembered names. He fixed what needed fixing and didn't chase credit. Within 2 weeks, he'd already improved scheduling efficiency and reduced late shipments. But that wasn't what he cared about most. What mattered more were the 3 junior employees he'd quietly discovered were struggling. 2 were veterans. 1 was the son of a fallen Marine. They'd never told anyone. Raymond didn't need them to. He saw it in their silence. He saw it in himself. By the end of the month, Caldwell Industries launched a mentorship initiative for transitioning veterans, and Raymond was the first name on the roster. Every Friday afternoon, he met with new hires and returning service members, helping them navigate the civilian workplace. Resumes, benefits, family transitions, emotional weight. He didn't give speeches. He told the truth. That was enough. One quiet morning, while sipping his coffee in the break room, Raymond's phone buzzed. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him to answer. "Dad?" came the voice on the other end. He straightened in his chair. "Leah," his daughter's voice cracked. "I saw everything. I didn't know. I didn't know people still stood up for you like that." Raymond's throat tightened. "It wasn't about me." "It was," she said, "and it should have been a long time ago." She started crying. "I'm proud of you, Dad. So are the kids. They want to visit the cafe, see the plaque." Raymond swallowed hard. "I'd like that." He didn't need awards, he didn't need headlines, but hearing his daughter's voice tremble with pride, that meant more than any medal ever had. That afternoon, he returned to his office and wrote 3 names on the whiteboard: Leah, Avery, and Miles, his daughter and 2 grandkids. In the corner, he added another word in bold: legacy. Because Raymond Cole had served in war, and he had survived it. But now, finally, he was learning how to live. And more importantly, how to help others do the same. 3 months later, Raymond Cole no longer walked into Caldwell Industries unnoticed. To the new hires, he was more than a supervisor. He was a symbol of what dignity looked like after service. His office door stayed open, his thermos always full of black coffee, and his calendar blocked every Friday afternoon for something he simply titled check-ins. Young veterans came to him with questions they were afraid to ask anywhere else. How do I explain the gap on my resume? What do I say when they ask about my service? What if I don't know who I am anymore? Raymond didn't give them polished answers. He gave them space. He gave them someone who understood that sometimes the hardest part of service was what came after the war. The silence, the routine, the feeling of being invisible. He reminded them they weren't. Across town, at the corner of Madison and Sycamore, Boyle's Cafe looked much the same. But something fundamental had shifted. The corner booth by the window, Raymond's old spot, had been rebuilt. A custom wooden backrest had been installed, sanded and stained by a local carpenter who was also a veteran. The tabletop had been replaced with polished walnut. A small bronze plaque had been screwed into the wall above the seat, gleaming in the morning light. It read, "Reserved for those who've served," in honor of Sergeant Raymond Cole. Every morning, someone different sat there. Sometimes it was a retired Navy man with a cane and a crossword puzzle. Sometimes it was a young Marine with a laptop and tired eyes. Sometimes Raymond himself sat there again, though never for long. He always gave it up if another veteran walked in. Irene Boyle made sure coffee was always free in that booth. She didn't take questions. She didn't accept payment. And her staff knew if anyone disrespected a veteran again, they wouldn't just be asked to leave. They'd be walked out by the same deputy who had responded that day. Other businesses followed suit. A bookstore down the street offered military discounts. The university invited veterans to speak at campus forums. A local high school teacher changed her entire curriculum around a unit called Service Beyond the Uniform. Even Ethan Caldwell changed. After months volunteering at the VA, he stopped arguing, stopped trying to justify. He showed up, cleaned floors, served lunch, listened. One day he quietly asked to meet Raymond. Raymond agreed, but not at the cafe. They met in a park, both seated on a bench as autumn leaves fell around them. Ethan apologized. Raymond listened. He didn't absolve him, but he gave him something rarer, a path forward. "You've got time to prove who you really are," Raymond told him. "Use it." And then he left. In the months that followed, the story of the coffee incident faded from headlines, but not from memory. It lived on in community action, in quiet gestures, and in the quiet courage of a man who never once raised his voice, but changed a city by enduring. One November morning, as sunlight filtered through the cafe windows and warmed the plaque above the booth, a little girl pressed her hand to it and whispered to her mother, "Who's that?" Her mother smiled. "That's for someone who protected people. Someone kind." The girl looked around. "Is he here?" The mother looked toward the door, thoughtful. Maybe, because Raymond Cole didn't need to be seen to be remembered. His legacy wasn't built on titles or trophies. It was built on quiet grace, on the steadiness of a man who bore more than his share and asked for nothing in return. And in the end, maybe that's what heroism really is. Not noise, not medals. Just a man who drinks his coffee in silence, waiting to be remembered. In a world moving faster than ever, where respect often gets lost in the noise, the story of Raymond Cole reminds us of something timeless. That honor doesn't retire, that quiet courage matters, and that sometimes the people we overlook hold the greatest stories of all. Raymond never asked for attention. He didn't fight back, didn't make a scene, but his silence, his restraint, woke up a community. It reminded people that service isn't just a chapter in someone's life. It's a legacy carried every day, in every step, every scar, and every act of dignity. There's a lesson here for all of us. Maybe it's to look twice before judging someone who sits alone. Maybe it's to speak up when others stay silent. Or maybe it's just this. True strength isn't loud. It's steady. It's patient. And it often wears flannel instead of armor. What do you take away from Raymond's story? Have you ever met someone like him? Quiet, kind, and caring more than they let on? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about how we can honor people like Raymond, not just with plaques, but with presence, with respect, and with action. And if this story moved you the way it moved us, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more true, touching stories that shine light on the quiet heroes among us. Because sometimes the most powerful people are the ones sitting quietly in the corner, just waiting for the world to remember them. Thank you for watching. And to all who have served or stood beside those who have, we see you, we honor you, and we remember.